Hello, this is Eric Green, Program Director with SC Media, and I'm sitting here with Giddy Cohen, the CEO and founder of Skybox. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
So, wanted to talk a little bit about the attack surface out there. I mean, threats have they're coming from all different directions, right? And we see this massive increase because of the real estate that we have in these organizations. Can you sort of address that a little bit?
Sure. So what it seems that over the last, I would say, 10 years, the attack surface organizations are having is actually exploding in size. It's exploding because there are many more devices organizations are using within the organization, but also all of their cloud assets. If you're looking on the utilities or energy or manufacturing sector, there are SCADA devices and ICS and IoTs. So in general, right, the amount of things that can be attacked and are vulnerable is growing massively.
Have organizations sort of like grown in their expertise for understanding the attack surface, or are we kind of like at an inflection point where people like you and others are saying, oh, everybody, come on, we need a catch-up period here, or have we gradually been getting it right?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think that the organizations are gradually getting it wrong. What happened is that not only the sheer size, right, of the attack surface, right, the amount of elements and vulnerabilities is making it difficult, but a lot of the elements now in the attack surface are getting less and less under the control of the organization. So think about, let's say, cloud assets. If organization have some, let's say a lot of machines, right, in AWS or Microsoft Azure or wherever, those assets are not fully managed, not the entire stack by the organization. So more and more assets are there part of the attack surface with less control.
Let's talk about the vulnerabilities that are out there. There's very sophisticated attacks, right? But there are also many unsophisticated attacks that are keeping on going on. Is that true? Are those the bulk? And how do people really concentrate on that?
Sure. So, I mean, there were always unsophisticated attacks. I think what changed over the last few years that there are a lot of tools that make the unsophisticated attacks actually pretty sophisticated and pretty broadly used. So if you're looking on cybercrime and all of the different crimeware techniques and technologies like ransomware and different malwares and exploit kits, etc., are making actually, in fact, they're all industrialized now, making it actually very easy to conduct a very broad and sophisticated attacks with actually simple tools, even if the attackers are not necessarily experts.
Right.
Let's say in writing code, writing exploits, actually you can rent tools and services and do a pretty good job in attacking a lot of innocent people.
DDoS for hire and everything else.
For example, DDoS for hire, ransomware for hire, etc. Yeah.
So, a gentleman like yourself, as the founder of your organization, you've been looking at this for a good deal of time, obviously, and this is something that you've thought about tremendously. Do you care what types of devices are causing these problems, or are you really focused on the threat itself and the vulnerability itself? Like, is there all of a sudden this point where we're like, iOS, that's what we have to worry about, or is it sort of across the board?
I would say it's across the board, because if you're looking on large enterprises and government agencies where we're focusing, at Skybox specifically, they have everything. They have all of the above. Right, so they have every type of firewall you can imagine, every type of router that you can imagine. They are using Windows and Linux, so for all of different sorts. They have on-prem and they have in the cloud assets, so they have everything. And therefore, from the ability to manage the attack surface, to gain visibility, to reduce the critical vulnerabilities, they need to deal with all of it. They cannot choose to focus on one part of the network and hope that if they do that well, they are going to be well protected. It's just not the case.
So talk about misconfigurations, right? Because you mentioned firewall. You think of firewall, IDS, IPS, SIM, and everyone has these things set up. And the vulnerabilities, they're great. It goes beep, it blinks, it's terrific. But if you misconfigure it, not so much. And so how does that, and then the vulnerabilities, here they are, right?
Yes, so it's a very good point, because the reality that as much as the network has a lot of assets, right, endpoint servers that are vulnerable, the security controls that are in place are typically misconfigured in a very significant way, such that a lot of the function, right, to mitigate traffic, to let's say with a firewall, or to shut down a potential attack with an IPS, due to misconfigurations, a lot of that doesn't happen. So a lot of the vulnerabilities that could have been shielded, let's say, by different security controls from exploitation, the reality they are not. And a lot of them become exploitable, regardless if they are by some APTs and some targeted attack, or by some malicious code, right, a ransomware exploit kit or whatever, that actually can take advantage of those vulnerabilities pretty easily.
So it's interesting, you know, over time, you've been in this industry a good long time, I'm sure too, and the days when Microsoft used to send everything's on, everything's open, right? And then our government, it was the Air Force at the time, turned around and said, look, we're paying so much for this stuff. Like, we want this closed, we want these things open, these are the ports that we're dealing with. So the question is, when it comes to those threats, when it comes to those misconfigurations, it's not so much whose fault it is, but who do you turn to? You need to, like, what do? You go and you talk to the network team and the security team, you know, and or do you get those teams to go talk to the vendors that they're buying this stuff from, right?
It's probably all of the above. I mean, because of the complexity, right, of the amount of vendors every organization is using in their network, both on the network layer, endpoint layer, application layer, whatever the case might be, at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the organization. I mean, you just mentioned about opening the right ports and closing the wrong ports. We have to remember that every enterprise has a lot of custom applications, a lot, I mean hundreds or thousands, that it's their responsibility, right, to develop, to deploy, to make sure the right connectivity is there. So there's no generic solution of, you know, what's right or what's wrong. It has to be done in the context of the organization.
Who is that in the organization that you're talking to, right? Because there's different points of entry for different parts of the conversation. I call it the buying community, right? Sure. So who is it that you're talking to?
There are a few actually buying communities from that perspective. Yeah. So probably the first one in the list is, let's say, the CISO, right? If you're looking at CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, responsible for the security of the organization, you know, governance of that, defining policies and all of that. One of the things they lack completely is visibility. Yeah. They just don't know what they have. They cannot get inventory list or credible inventory list updated on an ongoing basis from the IT operations as well, because in many cases they don't have it as well. Or they might have it in a lot of different silos that it's tough to know if they are covering everything or not. So CISO is a lot of where we are focusing, again, because they need just a basic way to gain the visibility of what's exposed and to be able to drive the organization, both tactically and strategically, where to make investment, where to replace vendors, what to put a priority, how much budget should they ask, you know, to reduce the risk level down back to where it needs to be.
And so this is where asset management, right, it comes in. I mean, when you're managing the assets of the company, it's not just the network, it's the devices, it's the people, is it all of it, or how do you like have, because assets are it's a broad term.
The reality is all of the above. Because the infrastructure of the organization is composed of a lot of different layers and a lot of different components, and the IT teams that are actually managing them are typically organized accordingly as well, right? So you might have, you will have, right, in large enterprise, a team that deals with network, and it's not that they don't care about the endpoints in the network, but, you know, their responsibility is to configure the network correctly from security, availability, performance perspective. You'll have teams that are dealing with the server side, regardless if it's on a virtualization cloud platform or, let's say, on some physical data center, let's say. They care about that. You have people that are caring, about the desktops, applications. So there are a lot of different elements that at the end of the day you need to look at assets in the broad sense of the word and to be able to cover all of it. The challenge, there are a lot of different type of assets and a lot of different pieces of the organization and dealing each one of them with a different asset class.
And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, great for having me. Thank you.